no president is above the law. Eventually, he will have to serve time, I believe. Trump has definitely and absolutely committed crimes. Read the book. Now, the trouble with the UK is that the monarchs and their hangers-on, the courtiers, the family, seem to think they literally are above the law. It's a fiction, and it's a dangerous one. And it's, sailed very close to the wind because illegal things have been done around Brexit. But the people that have committed those illegal things, like Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson, have had a sort of blessing from on high from royals who are also doing illegal things. And therefore it's a sort of collusion of evil, which is hitting the British people with this double whammy. It's like a horde of demons come from within and without. And, I think there needs to be a national conversation about, is this the best way to govern an advanced modern democracy? Do we really want a royal system that can be so easily corrupted and whose secrets can be then manipulated? No, I don't think we do. I think we want a genuinely, fair, decent and honourable monarchy like the Danes or the Norwegians or the Swedes or the Dutch, which doesn't have such huge powers. I think it should be slimmed down. I'd like to see Charles riding about on a bicycle when he becomes king. And Buckingham Palace should be turned into maybe a National Peace Institute. They don't need it. They can live in Windsor. The Welsh are very disgruntled. Another thing we've learned from Brexit: Welsh very unhappy. I'm a Welshman deep down. I lived there for 10 happy years. I love Wales. It's in my blood. The Tudor dynasty came from Anglesey, from Druid stock, and then they ended up in France. The only reason we got the Tudors on the throne is because the French gave them succour. Owen Tudor ended up here, and Tudor means gift of God. It was the Welsh for Theodore, meaning gift of God. I hope the Welsh realise the catastrophe that the English have done to their constitution and to their faith. They've broken faith with right reason, and at that point you have to leave them. I did this wonderful exhibition in Shrewsbury Museum in 2003 in honour of the 1403 Battle of Shrewsbury, when the Welsh resistance forces under Owen Glendower had tried to ally with the Northumbrians under Harry Hotspur to create a sort of federal UK. They were smashed by Henry VI and Henry V, his young son, with mass war crime of using the longbow in a mass slaughter. For the first time, it was trial before Agincourt. And, it was a catastrophe. I always rather liked Owen Glendower. He was known as the magician of Wales. And he tried to get a sort of Welsh democracy going. He had a parliament in Machynlleth, and I think it's time, for the Welsh to go their way too, and rejoin the European Union as a proud and wonderful and amazing nation. Okay, the Scots are disgruntled. The Scots are beyond disgruntled. I mean, okay, what's all this weird stuff about sturgeon and salmon, To be honest, it reeks of British intelligence. Westminster intelligence has gone in there, planted stuff, tried to cause disunity. I don't know the details, I can't be bothered to go into it, but I'm an old enough hack at this to know that that's what's been going on. Craig Murray, kind of knows it too. We'll never know the full details. It will be kept from us. But that is what's been going on. And I think anyone that loves Scotland, wants Scottish independence, and actually wants to restore moral integrity to the UK as a whole, has to just face that down and see it for what it is. I believe that Alex Salmon and Nicola Sturgeon ought to spend like a long chat in one of the bars in Edinburgh and realise they've been had. This conflict between them is fake. Neither of them are working for British intelligence. That I can assure you. And they have to realise that someone in their circles probably both of them are, and have created an illusion that those two are at loggerheads. Actually, they're not. They have far more in common. They both want a free, independent, healthy, prosperous and happy Scotland, adhering to the fundamental democratic rights and values of the European Union, rejoining us here in Europe and re-establishing the old alliance between, only this time between the whole of Europe and Scotland. I lived in Scotland for 7 years. I know the Scottish soul. I know that's what it wants. I also know that British intelligence, Westminster intelligence, will do all it can to prevent it and throw every single dirty trick that they can think of. And that's what they've done with the sturgeon, salmon nonsense. And they'll continue to do it. And of course they use the courts to do it. Because the courts, they've corrupted the legal system. They're very good at that, as we've seen with the Assange case, where the whole thing is stitched up. And even now he's not allowed out of prison. I mean, God, talk about injustice and corruption in the land, you know? Anyway, we also know the Northern Irish are not happy. They voted strongly to stay in the European Union. The only people that didn't want to tended to be the kind of, the extreme Protestant loyalist types that still waving the flag and want to fight at the barricades to prevent Europeanness happening. And Paisley and his sort of intellectual descendants are anti-Europeans. They're phobic against Europe. For reasons that psychohistorians can explain. It's to do with lots of things. And now it's come out in public because those Protestant extremists have now reneged on the Good Friday Agreement. This is the big news of this last week. That's why I'm emphasising the Brexit stuff so strongly here. Because I've been warning about that for the last 3 years, ever since I started these weekly fasts. I chair the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland. I'm appalled, shocked, horrified and dismayed that the Westminster governance system has proved so unable to prevent this catastrophe. And I've been warning against this. I've been writing in private to the Queen, to the Prime Ministers, to everyone of influence I can. And I've been warning it publicly to you, the public. And I've said all along that this will mean, if Brexit is implemented in the way that it's been done, it will mean the probable resumption of violence on the streets of Belfast and Northern Ireland. And we now have a salvo across the decks of history. The Protestant loyalists are now saying that. Why are they saying that? Well, they're saying it because those kind of types want violence. Once a terrorist, always a terrorist. I don't care if you're a Protestant terrorist or a Catholic terrorist or a Marxist terrorist or any kind of terrorist or an Islamic terrorist. That's what they like to do. And so they've got a cause now, whipped up by the right-wing press, by the Conservative Party, by the various extreme unionists. They now have been taught that Brexit would have been perfect if it wasn't for the European Union. Brexit's all going bad because the European Union are horrible and they bullied us. And, these are all lies. Brexit was never a feasible or intelligent ethical choice, politically speaking. It was against the letter and the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement intended that there should have already been a referendum on reunification of Ireland under its terms. And the fact that the political parties have not called for that even Sinn Féin has not called for that, again, it's to do with the intelligence suppressing the actual will of the people of Northern Ireland. And it's to do with a corrupt Westminster system that is silencing the will of the people. And there is collusion going on between the British state, the Conservative Party, British intelligence, and the Protestant extremists who are now saying, well, the only solution to this Good Friday thing is, well, we just abandon Good Friday. That, my friends, was the peace agreement of 1998, which ended the troubles in Northern Ireland. I've witnessed all this. You know, I was there when the bomb went off in Canary Wharf. It rattled the windows of the School of Non-Violence where I was teaching. And I've travelled and met people in Belfast and Dublin and Londonderry and all over, from all sides, from the Protestant community, from the Catholic community, the Druid community, the academic community. I've worked in peace studies and met at conferences many of the great Irish thinkers of peace. And, you know, some of them are my colleagues and friends. We're all appalled at the ignorance shown by these so-called political, you know, groupings of the Tory party and the Brexit faction. Their ignorance towards Irish affairs is abysmal and scandalous. People like Priti Patel and this Chancellor chap Rishi and all the rest of them, Gove and co, their arrogance towards Ireland and their ignorance about Irish history is is shocking. And Biden is absolutely correct to say that he, as American president, will not adhere to this nonsense. He supports, it was America that largely enabled the Good Friday Agreement to happen. And it was then the process of disarmament was overseen by General de Chatelain, a French-Canadian general from the Canadian Army. You know, this is an international problem, Ireland, and the European Union is absolutely right to flag that up and to insist that the Good Friday Agreement should be adhered to. Now, if an extremist Protestant sectarian terrorist organisation tears all that up and starts bombing again, well, the British government ought to clamp down on them and arrest them. But of course they won't, because the extremist Brexiteers are of their ilk. They are as fanatical and as ignorant and as violent. What Brexit has done is a coup by a bunch of terrorists against the very fabric and heart of UK democracy. And that's been revealed, that's been exposed this week. Anyone with any decency, any Tories left with a brain and a morality, you know, Chris Patten, etc., come out speaking against this. Boris Johnson should be, you know, hounded out of office in shame because of this announcement this week. He has precipitated and enabled this resumption of intention to commit terrorism. What that is, that statement, is it's a notice of intention to commit terrorism. Well, that I think is illegal and should be dealt with as such. But unfortunately, British intelligence has been hijacked and taken over by the very thinking that is behind it. So there's a struggle going on. I mean, poor old John le Carré, had he lived a bit longer, would have written the story of what's going on at the moment in British intelligence and how it's failed to stop this Brexit coup. And how, anyway, I'm just, you know, an academic here, I'm just observing, I'm not a member of any intelligence organisation, apart from academia and the kind of community of the Kingdom of God. My kids in school used to say, surely you work for intelligence. So I said, yes, I'm an intelligence agent for the Kingdom of God. and it's taking a while to get on earth, but that is my pledge. And it's neither Protestant, nor Catholic, nor Orthodox, nor necessarily Christian, nor Kabbalist, nor Sufi, nor Buddhist. It's all of them together. The proper Kingdom of God is the shared common universal wisdom between all faith traditions and all truths. And it's about goodness, morality and truth and happiness and enlightenment. And that's the point of the periodic table. That's what I work for. As did Plato and, you know, a few others. What else have we learned? Well, we've learned that Brexit is such a ridiculous concept. It's cost more now, in the few years since it was launched, than the entire 50 years membership of the European Union. It's cost to the British economy billions, and it's still doing so. You know, I mean, never in the history of human history has such a travesty of intelligent policy been pursued that it's like, you know, imagine you invite it's trick or treat, a few people at the door, you invite them in, and within 10 minutes they're in the basement setting light to it, burning the house down, and then they demand a couple of £1,000 for doing the job. I mean, what? You'd send for, Buffy the Vampire Slayer and get them out of the house, right? But that's what these Brexit monsters have done. They've trashed the house, burned it down, and they've cost the British people more than the entire membership of the European Union, which is like the equivalent of having fire insurance. The European Union is there for all the nations of Europe to prevent us having, burning our houses down. Yet that's what this Brexit monster lot have done. So where's Buffy when we need her? That's what I say. Another thing, the final thing that I want to say about what we've learned is that politicians cannot admit mistakes. I've noticed this. I've been around long enough to see this. I don't remember the last time a politician ever, and I'm not talking just in Britain, I'm talking maybe in other countries too. I don't recall a time when the politicians ever admitted a mistake. It's not in the brain capacity of Boris Johnson or Theresa May or any of the Tories, apart from the decent ones that have gone, like Ken Clarke and so on, or Dominic Grieve. Those people were genuine human beings who, you see, it's a mark of a true human that they can admit their mistakes, because then you can learn. Only if you make mistakes and admit it can you learn. I mean, think back to your childhood. You were always falling down, falling off the bike. That's how you learn to ride a bike. And I want to share something that's very interesting. Some new research in neurology and brain science has revealed that mistakes are really important for learning processes. They've done some research in mathematics education, and some neuroscientists have discovered that if you're working out a maths problem, puzzle, and you work out the sums and you get it wrong, that actually is figured in the brain as a sort of a success, and it helps stimulate the neurons that then reform and try it slightly differently, and then you keep going, and then you make the breakthrough and you get it right. That's how the brain actually works. But you have to admit the mistake was happening in order to then get the right solution for the maths puzzle. Now, they've analysed this at the detail of neurological observance. And the revolutionary breakthrough that's been made in this, which impacts on me as an educator, is in our classrooms, whether you're teaching maths, religion, English, whatever subject, you should encourage kids to try to attempt the problem and then to admit and see where they got it wrong. Not to be ashamed or hide it up or say, no, I didn't get that wrong. That way you can't learn. If you're teaching maths and you're trying to teach them, I don't know, some aspect of algebra, and they're all kind of doing it in their own way and none of them have got it right, but they all insist they did and stubbornly, refuse to admit they were wrong, they're never going to learn to do it right. I mean, that's the whole point of education. Education can only advance at the speed at which you are brave enough to admit your mistakes. And that takes courage, because you have to be able to say in the class, well, I don't understand that. I didn't get it right. I don't understand that, how that works. Or no, I mean, I've had kids in religious studies. I mean, I'm a religious studies teacher, not a maths teacher, but I love maths as well. And I've had kids say in school, talking about the timing of different prophets, who was first? Muhammad? It's a very simple question to put to kids. What's the timeline order? Sort these out, please. Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, Buddha. Just four, we'll just take four. Put them in a sequence. And a lot of them get it wrong. They just simply don't realise that, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad is that sort of sequence. Now, some say, Muhammad, well, he must have been before Moses, or maybe he was before Jesus. Because the infrastructure isn't there, the basic general knowledge that comes with studying this thing. Now, only if you admit that's wrong can you then learn the correct time order and then be able to get in your head the chronology of the major religions. And that's why I produced the periodic table that gives the chronology of them all. And I did it because of, I was seeing how lacking in basic chronological knowledge the education system is doing, because history, the way it's taught in British schools, is not teaching people a general joined up chronology of time, but it's teaching little bits, you know, Romans, castles, Normans, Tudors, Hitler. I mean, that's it, you know, and you never join anything up. It's a joke. Well, if you tried to teach religion like that, which they do, kids have no understanding of how these things are all joined up. And that's why, as an educator, I invented the periodic table to show the timelines. And that's where we got to Brexit from, because the education system has utterly failed. And the fundamental thing that our politicians should be admitting is, yes, we got it wrong. Brexit was a mistake. As soon as Theresa May says that, as soon as Boris Johnson admits that, as soon as all the Tories admit that, as soon as Keir Starmer and the leader of the Lib Dems, you know, Ed Davey and all the others say, look, this was wrong. This was a mistake. It doesn't matter that the referendum was one way or the other. The referendum was a mistake in the way it was set up. Cameron has to come out and say that. Now, the fact that they don't shows they're not learning. Going back to Keats' point, School for Souls, those guys are all like really bottom class material. They're in detention as far as I'm concerned because they cannot admit their mistake. And so the political system is in absolute meltdown and crisis because of it. And this is to do with arrogance and hubris. People that are arrogant can never admit their mistakes. And they've got so much invested in their ego, it's always right, that they can't admit they were wrong ever. Do we really want to be governed by such people? Well, obviously not, no. And we've got to get rid of them. Okay, but we are where we are. How do we get out of this mess? You know, the system is gamed in such a way that it elevates and promotes people that never admit they're wrong, that fanatically bash on. I mean, it's a bit like Hitler in the bunker up to the last minute. They're going to come and save us. We are the immense, invincible German people. We are right. And all his lieutenants had fled because they knew he was crazy. And what was crazy about Hitler is he refused to admit his mistakes. He refused to realise that his policies were disastrous. His invasion of Russia was disastrous. His invasion of Poland was disastrous. His extreme anti-Semitism was disastrous. You know, the list goes on and on. But because he convinced himself he was always right and everyone else was wrong, it led Germany into an abysm of catastrophe. Well, that's what Brexit is, and it's coming from the same stable of absolute insistence on I'm right, you're wrong. That's hubris, and that's what accompanies all tyrannical cults. Stalinism was another. Stalin could never admit he was wrong, ever until the last breath. And millions of people had to die, rather than him admit he was wrong about his interpretation of Marx, his interpretation of communism, and what was suited for Russia. I want to draw your attention to a very important book that I'm studying, which sort of explains partly the background, how we got Brexit, which is this book by Shoshana Zuboff, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. If you've not read it, get a copy and read it. You know, it's an important and insightful study. I watched her interview with Amy Goodman some time ago on her Democracy Now! Programme. And she's updated Marxism to take on board this hybrid, this new thing, which she calls surveillance capitalism. She argues that the algorithms that run Google and Facebook and all the rest are gamed in such a way that they want to know everything about what we do, how we spend our time, where we spend our money, who we're with. All the little details of our lives are now assembled as facts stored in data computer sets that then can be sold on to commercial corporations that can try and sell us stuff. So, okay, somebody works out, Thomas likes wearing Turkish red hats. Okay, so 10 advertisements will pop up, you know. Thomas can have some new blue hats or whatever. And that's happening all the time. That's how the system operates. Now, Shoshana is very intelligent. She's a very wise woman. The book is extremely well read. But I think she downplays something, and I'm halfway through and it hasn't been flagged up enough, which is the collusion between surveillance capitalism and military capitalism. In my critique of Das Kapital, in my commentary which I've conducted into the work, I found a huge glaring lacuna in Marx, huge, which was never discussed by economists, as far as I know, very few, none have flagged this up, or given it its due prominence, which is, Marx talks, 3,000 pages about capitalism and its origin, and he never mentions war. He never mentions militarism. He has pages and reams devoted to the impact of technology and how nefarious hyper-technology is in its impact on working classes, and how the old crafts and trade systems are replaced by mechanisation and the factory system. He never mentions the fact that the greatest driver of technological change is militarism. It was because the Renaissance and then early modern European nation states wanted armies with bigger and better cannon and mechanised warfare, tanks and planes and trains and machine guns, and then planes and bombers. All that was technologically devised for warfare. And not one peep in Marx, not a single peep. Now you can't say, well, yeah, but he lived before World War I and World War II. Surely he would have written it differently. He lived through the American Civil War, which was the first really mechanised war in history. The machine gun had been invented and the number of casualties was proportionate. The American Civil War was a horrendous killing machine on both sides. And it was won ultimately by the guys with the greatest concentration of technological weaponry, which was the North. And the South was a bunch of redneck farmers that had a few flintlocks, really, in comparison. And Marx knew this, and he should have mentioned it. He didn't. Well, even great thinkers have blind spots. I think Marx also, like politicians, refused ever to admit his mistakes. He would rather row with you and fight to the death than admit he was wrong about something. We've all met types like that, and it's really annoying. Anyway, Shoshana does mention, and this is important, she has an excellent section on the collusion deals done between the surveillance capitalist enterprises like Google, Facebook and all the rest, and American intelligence. They've done a sort of, we'll share everything we know and you'll give us millions of pounds. So at the very highest level there is a collusion going on between American intelligence, so-called, it's a bit of a misnomer it seems, and these high-tech wizards. But the thing is, the problem that I have with it is that it's not, as I say, very intelligent, because it's premised on a false notion of security. The way that American intelligence operates is we will defend the US and its interests against all, out there, all the enemy. And it's premised on enemy thinking. Rather than inclusive, holistic, let's protect the earth, the environment, and all society, all classes, not just the West Point elites, the kind of military types. But, what about the poor? What about the blacks? What about the women of America? What about the working classes? They don't even figure in the algorithms. And we saw that under Trump. Trump was the ruthless, naked, apparatchik of corrupt military intelligence regimes in both America and Russia, as, I keep flagging up, but, American Compromise, read it. That's where it came from. Now, those are what I call pseudo-intelligence agents. They're working to a destructivist agenda. They use blackmail, corruption, illegalism, which is my word for lawyers that work with lies for power. They're illegalists, pretending to masquerade under law. Trump was a master of illegalism. He kept doing things that were illegal, right up to the last minute, pardoning criminals. He was an illegalist regime. How far back does it go? How do we stop this? We're just poor little simple people. We believe in things like truth and love and decency and honour. We haven't got a hope in hell against these big boys, do we? I don't know. one can but try. One can only tell the truth and hope that somebody listens and clocks it. I think enough people did with the Biden-Trump choice. They realised at the crunch time that, Biden had it and he won and he was a truth teller. And, he succeeded. We need to have that. That should never be forgotten, the importance of that. And that attack on the Capitol was symbolic of the assault of lies and corruption, But as I've said before, Brexit represents that collusion, that attack in slow motion. How do we get out of this? How far back does it go? Well, okay, so, I'm a historian and I've been asking that question. I was trained at the University of London. I did a doctorate to try and understand and join up the pieces of history. What a historian does is they look at interconnections of events throughout space and time across a certain given chronology. For my PhD thesis, I looked at from 1945 to 2001. And I looked at everyone that was talking and working for peace at that time, to end the Cold War, and to end the confrontational politics that would lead to nuclear annihilation and nuclear omnicide, as my friend Professor John Somerville called it. And then 9/11 happened. And I'd been feeling optimistic up to that point. I felt the Cold War was over. We had got out of that nightmarish East-West polarization. I'd been to Russia several times. I had friends in the Russian philosophical community and the American. I had friends all over the world. I'd set up the Institute of Peace Studies at the University of London. I felt peace was finally around the corner. And then 9/11. Like, where on earth did that come from? I'd been teaching at the Muslim college. I had many, many Muslim students all over the world. Dear friends from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from Syria, from wherever. And suddenly they're the enemy. They did 9/11. To be honest, I was in a state of shock. I didn't believe it. And I said, let's suspend judgment. Let's look at the facts here. The facts were never presented. The evidence was never forthcoming. It was a sort of prejudgment that was done. And the more I looked into it, the more I spoke to American researchers and so on in the early 2000s, I realised that the story we were told by the Bush Commission was false. And like our American colleagues who set up architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, Richard Gage, and other people, the theologian from Claremont and so on, they were blowing the whistle. They'd done enormous research and realised that 9/11 was not what it seemed. It was a bit of a, let's say, a conspiracy on multi-levels. It was obviously a conspiracy, and yes, probably some Muslims were involved, and yes, some elements in Al-Qaeda seemed to be involved, but wasn't it weird they were being paid for by the Saudi embassy? Wasn't it weird they were, having deals with secret CIA members? Wasn't it weird that bin Laden had been on the payroll of the CIA? Etc., etc. So the more people that researched all this, it was obvious that it was not all what it seemed. And so that's why I wrote a book about it. Still the first and only detailed historical and philosophical and ethical survey of what 9/11 was and how it happened and what happened. It's called the Prolagomena to a history of 9/11. It's a prolegomena in the sense that Kant used the term, because it's not the definitive, forever, absolutely true history of 9/11, because it's a prolegomena, because as a professional historian I'm saying, what do we need to know before we can write the definitive history of 9/11? There should be a historian's commission, like there was for the Warren Commission for Kennedy, but with real people. And that's what I've set up.